Hello, welcome to Chasing Zebras, Infectious Diseases Made Fun. My name is Sudha Murthy, and I'm going to talk today about an active learning exercise that I developed while teaching microbiology at the University of the Sciences in Philadelphia. Why chasing zebras, you ask? Let's find out. Medical students are taught that when they hear hoofbeats, they should think horses, not zebras. That is, while diagnosing a situation, a simpler assumption that explains is better. Yet, Dr. House from Princeton Plainsboro Hospital, and I'm sure many of you recognize this guy, specializes in chasing zebras. For House, medical diagnosis is like a puzzle to be solved. He believes the patient's history and the patient's background will clue him to what's wrong with the patient. He watches symptoms, asks questions, occasionally experiments with treatments, and not surprisingly, in case after case, he lassos in the zebra among the horses. Dr. House makes diagnosis an engaging experience. Learning happens by recognizing and synthesizing what you know, thus making clear distinctions across different diseases. Now, medical microbiology is so information-driven that you can get lost in the details. But could House show my students how to keep track of infectious disease and chase the zebras? It occurred to me as I was rewatching an episode about rabies that here was the hook that I could use to help my students transition from a rote learning process to experiential learning. Let me walk you through my journey. In the next few minutes, I'm going to talk to you about this activity, who can benefit from it, what learning outcomes to aim for, and the impact chasing zebras has had in my classes. Finally, I'm going to leave you with a couple of examples created by my students. Those of you who are still deciding whether to watch this microbrew presentation to the end, I urge you to first watch the student presentation videos and get a taste for this activity. We all know how information-rich medical microbiology is. I remember from my own undergrad days, the challenge of committing to memory the causative organisms, symptoms, treatment options, etc., of different yet very similar infections. Take, for example, this chapter on bacterial and viral infections in a standard introductory microbiology textbook. The circled words show how similar measles, rubella, also known as German measles, and mumps really are. The pictures don't really help much with the distinction either. Now let's take a look at the next section in the same chapter, common cold and influenza. Again, note the similarity in the symptoms. Inflammation of the nasal mucous membranes, muscle aches and fatigue, general feeling of malaise, and to boot, both common cold and influenza are transmitted by aerosols, droplets expelled during coughing and sneezing. Publishers have created different study aids for such topics, but memorization is still challenging. Remember also that we have students with varying degrees of exposure to microbiology. Chasing zebras makes medical microbiology an immersive and engaging learning experience for all students. It's a group activity where students enact house-style scenarios to understand infectious disease. The activity has 3 components. In the first, student groups choose an infection to work on. They research the infection and answer questions in a worksheet. In the second, based on their research, they develop a scenario or case study. And finally, in class, groups present their stories. The audience are provided with reference material collated from the students' own research. Based on the clues and hints provided, the audience must identify the infection being described. Let me explain how these components work. And remember, we are going to take a look at some examples as well. On the left here, we see an example of the worksheet or the questionnaire, which is the first component of this project. Students research their textbooks, but they're also encouraged to research reliable external sources as well. The questions are designed to help them understand the pathology and epidemiology of the infection they have chosen to work with. Using the student responses to the questions in the worksheet, I create a reference spreadsheet that you see on the right. The case study is the second component of this project. Based on their research and their worksheet answers, students now develop a medical mystery. They're encouraged to use visual aids, including slides, enactment, etc. And they're also given an opportunity to share drafts of their stories with me before submission. What you see here on the right is an example of a malaria case study draft that some of my students created. Finally, we play the game. Student groups take turns to present their case studies. The audience is given access to the reference spreadsheet. The audience must use the clues provided by the presenters and the information available in the reference sheet to correctly identify the infection. And there are so many ways that we can up the challenge. Students can be made to differentiate between a bunch of common microbial infections and even between symptoms that are microbial or non-microbial in origin. For example, something that we have all been faced with in the past couple of years is to be able to differentiate COVID from flu, common cold, and even the seasonal allergies. If you're teaching a topic in human genetics, students can play with genetic disorders. If you're teaching biochemistry, maybe you can try metabolic disorders. You could even have groups peer review each other's presentations. My target audience has been undergraduate freshmen and sophomores. The activity has been universally well received by biology majors and non-majors and allied health students. This is usually the last project we do in the semester before we break up for the final exams, and students love the time to work at their own pace with pit stops where I check in with them about their progress. That being said though, it's also possible to tweak this activity for high school or middle school biology students. Chasing Zebras addresses several student learning outcomes, not the least of which is that infectious disease presentation reflects human diversity. Chasing Zebras has had an amazing impact on my microbiology classes. It develops self-learning skills. It was designed as a synchronous in-class activity, but has also been utilized as an asynchronous studying tool by the students. It's been tried and tested in virtual and in-person settings. It fulfills UDL requirements beautifully, and it uses media to hook students onto microbiology. But what I like most is that it showcases diversity and is necessarily inclusive. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Now, dengue is a disease of tropical and subtropical areas, but is very rare in temperate climes. Also, natives of West Africa are at a lower risk for malaria than are Europeans. So, student stories, while based on scientific facts, also give them insight into how inherently diverse the human race is. Chasing Zebras is an easy introduction to medical microbiology. It can be tweaked or customized for its target audience. Not only do students like to create the puzzle, they're also very enthusiastic about sharing how they crack the clues. I've even had students use their personal experiences in their case studies. Something to bear in mind, though, to get the most out of this activity is that educators should plan ahead to give students a relevant background in epidemiology, immunology, genetics, etc. For example, if students are working on rabies, they need to be aware that though hydrophobia is often used to definitively identify rabies, and this was in fact the case in the house episode as well, it is one of the last symptoms in the progression of the infection. If a patient has reached this point, their infection cannot be treated. Again, in developed parts of the world like the US, we only think of cholera as a rare occurrence due to the consumption of raw seafood. But in underdeveloped regions like Bangladesh, cholera epidemics are quite frequent. So we do need to ensure that we fill in all the gaps to make this role play a learning experience. And finally, here's what we've been waiting for. A couple of videos made by some of my students are available as part of this microgroup presentation. The last file is a reference sheet that I have created. So sit back, watch these student presentations, and play Chasing Zebras. Thanks for watching. Please do reach out if you have any questions. I'm also happy to share my resources and instructor's guide for Chasing Zebras. Have a nice day.
Hello, welcome to our case study. Today we're going to look into the lives of two college students at University of the Sciences to try and discover what disease is spreading throughout the LLC. We're going to look into room 604. Michelle seems to be experiencing some type of symptoms lately. What could they be? Especially with COVID spreading in Philly, we want to make sure that she's okay and she can go to Rena's party next week.
Rena, I don't feel too good.
What's going on? Are you okay?
Lately, I've been feeling a tickle in the back of my throat and I can't stop coughing up phlegm. It's so gross. I don't know what's wrong.
Oh yeah, I've noticed you coughing a lot at night lately. Do you have COVID?
No, I don't think so. I just feel really weak and it's hard to breathe sometimes.
We should definitely go to Shack and get you a COVID test, just to be safe.
2 business days later, Michelle's COVID test came back negative, so she doesn't have COVID. But what could it be?
I told you I'm COVID-free, but I'm so tired and I feel even worse. My chest hurts too.
All right, we're going to an urgent care. I'll drive.
The girls head to urgent care on Penn's campus in a rush.
Hello, girls. What seems to be the issue?
We are Group 11, and we present the case study of John Doe. After 2 years of being free from leukemia, John Doe planned a trip to Paris to get married to his high school sweetheart. At the beginning of the week of the wedding, his brother, Jaron, and John went to a bachelor party at a club that was overly packed with people. Unusually, some people were coughing at the party near Jaron.
A few days later, John woke up experiencing chest congestion, dry cough, and fever. John, who was worried about being sick during the wedding, chose to go see a doctor with his brother.
The doctor asked John what his symptoms were, to which he replied that he's been experiencing fever, dry cough, and chest congestion, and also talks about his history of leukemia, which he was free of.
The doctor, who understood that John might be immunocompromised, suggested they do a sample test of saliva and mucus to see if he has any chest infection. The doctor then collected the mucus sample from John and sent it to the lab to get it tested.